Hi guys, I wasn't going to give you a video for chapter 12, but I realized when I was doing chapter 13 there are some things that I want you to understand going forward in the class. So I'm going to go through the really vital things. This is going to be a really short video, I hope. Okay, so what do you need to know from chapter 12? Well, you need to know how we organize life. And I think that's the whole goal of chapter 12. How do we organize life? How do we categorize it? And what are the ways that are being used now? And how has that changed over time? Because it's changed a lot. Right now we have 3 domains of life: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. All life came from perhaps one common prokaryotic ancestor. No evidence, right? Because it happened over 3 billion years ago. But this is what we think it looks like right now. It didn't always look like this though, right? It's changed. So life on Earth has been categorized or recategorized. When I was an undergrad, it looked like this. 6 kingdoms, 2 empires. But since then, the molecular revolution has taken over, and molecular evidence suggests now, at least the way we interpret it, is that there are 3 major domains of life. For this class, the biggest thing we're going to be talking about and how this affected the evolution of eukarya, because eukaryotes are different than bacteria and archaea. Archaea and bacteria are pretty similar to each other. Why are eukarya so different? Well, for this class, the thing we're going to focus on is the evolution of organelles, mitochondria and plastids. Hopefully you've covered some of these concepts in previous class, but if not, don't worry, because I'm going to tell you what's important for this class. So this is eukarya today. These are called the supergroups of eukarya. There are some early eukaryotes. There's a putative ancestor. The ancestry of eukaryotes isn't that clear, actually. We don't know a heck of a lot about it, but there's a lot of different groups. And the only things we're not going to be talking about in this class are the animals, the land plants, and the fungi. Those are the only eukaryotes we're not going to talk about. Everything else is fair game. And everything else is considered a protist. So what do you need to know about life cycles? I'm going to throw this in right now because we're going to be talking a lot about different life cycles, and I want you to understand fundamentally why life cycles are important and what the important factors in a life cycle are. Okay, so the life cycle is just the phases of an organism from zygote to gamete production. All organisms have them. They can look really different though. But every single organism on Earth, if you pare it down, they'll have some version of this. These are important, so you have to understand this. So make sure you understand this, and if you don't, come talk to me. So here's just a really generic life cycle. Basically, the 2 main events are fertilization and meiosis, right? So we're cycling between haploid and diploid phases in the life cycle. And in this case, both the diploid and the haploid organism are multicellular. And this is one way you can do it. It's not the only way, but the key things are fertilization, meiosis. Where does meiosis happen? Where does fertilization happen? Okay, now the 2 bodies that are part of the life cycle are gametophyte and the sporophyte. Sorry if my window is obscuring your view. Gametophyte is haploid. It's always haploid. It produces haploid gametes through mitosis. And these gametes fuse to produce the zygote, the diploid zygote. The diploid zygote goes on to form the sporophyte generation. So the sporophyte is the diploid generation. It produces spores through meiosis, right? Because spores are haploid. Spores divide mitotically, and the outcome of these spores grow up to become a haploid gametophyte. So sporophyte, gametophyte, cycling between them, haploid, diploid. Hope this is clear to you. What's important for us is which generation is multicellular. In this case, they're both multicellular, but like I said, it's not always the case, and that has pretty significant outcomes to what kind of lifestyle these organisms can have, where their multicellular life phase exists. There's 3 basic life cycles: zygotic, gametic, and sporic meiosis. And I just want to show you the main events of each one. Zygotic meiosis happens in fungi and some protists, not all protists. In this case, zygotic meiosis, we think the first eukaryotes had some life cycle similar to this. The only multicellular part of the life cycle is in the gametophyte. So if you could see it, if it's got multicellular, you know it's haploid. These haploid individuals divide mitotically to produce gametes, which fuse to form the diploid phase, which in this case is only the zygote. So the diploid phase is only 1 cell big. It immediately undergoes meiosis to produce gametes, and the cycle continues. This is a great strategy for aquatic organisms because so much of it happens in the environment. Fertilization happens in the environment. Gametes are released directly into the environment. The zygote is free living in the environment, and the spores are produced free living in the environment. So there's got to be a way to protect them from drying out and from finding each other. And that happens fairly easily when you're an aquatic or marine organism. So this is why this strategy is pretty common for algae. Gametic meiosis, on the other hand, happens in animals and some other algae too. Yes, we cycle between haploid and diploid, but it looks quite different in humans. In our case, the multicellular phase of our life cycle is diploid. So if you can see it, it's diploid. And the gametophyte phase of our generation is really, really reduced. It only is the gametes. Gametes are the only phase of the gametophyte generation. So our only haploid cells are ova and sperm cells. Key difference here is all the important things like fertilization, development of the embryo, and spore release happens inside the sporophyte. It happens inside the adult individual, the multicellular individual in gametic meiosis. And that means you don't have to live where there's water because your important cells, your gametes and your spores are never released into the environment. You can protect them and you can nurture that little embryo. So this is a good strategy if you're not aquatic, if you do want to become terrestrial. The last type of life cycle is sporic meiosis. This happens in all plants and it happens in some algae. And this is also different because in this case, both of the life cycles are multicellular. So you can have fleshy individuals that are haploid or diploid. They can look really different, but they're the same plant undergoing different phases of their life cycle. Now, how did this happen? Well, I told you at first we think that the zygotic meiosis was what the earliest eukaryotes had. Even this earliest eukaryote that didn't have a multicellular diploid phase, if meiosis was delayed and instead there was mitosis, some freak mitotic accident happened, that could easily create a multicellular sporophyte phase. Well, easy, but it could happen. And that's the predominant explanation is how plants were able to transfer onto land, because they developed the sporophyte generation that was multicellular, where fertilization can happen, where the embryo could develop and not get desiccated. Okay, so I'm going to put these slideshows on the website so you can refer back to them, but these are the 3 life cycles. It's important to understand how they're different, where they're different, and also why they're different. Key factors were the development of internal fertilization and embryo development to allow life to move onto land. But what about the eukaryotes that are still in the water? Not all eukaryotes evolved to be terrestrial. In fact, I'd say most didn't. What about the eukaryotic cells that evolved to stay in the water? Well, this class is mostly about those creatures. Almost everything we're going to look at and think about lives in water. If not water directly, it lives in the soil pores where there is water. So they are definitely aquatic and marine organisms. There are some terrestrial organisms too, and we're going to talk about that transition when we talk about moss. But largely we're talking about the eukaryotes that didn't need to evolve different life cycles. They were happy to stay in the water. Okay, so protists, we're going to look at the protists that spend at least part of their life cycle in the water. Not all of them, but not all of the life cycle, but at least a good chunk of it. Okay, so at the end of every video, I'm going to post some questions, what I think are important things to remember, and will probably be part of your final exam in some way. What are the domains of life and how are they related to each other in an evolutionary sense? And what are the 3 basic life cycles? Compare and contrast. Like I said, I'll post this online so you can refer to it later, but I just wanted to introduce what I'm doing here. All right, I hope that helps clear some things up. If it doesn't, make sure to write me a question on the discussion board, or I would prefer that because then everyone can see the answer, or to email me if it's more convoluted. Either way, I think the discussion board is the way to go, but I'm open to your emails as long as they're through Canvas. All right, talk to you soon.